We spend so much of the year waiting for a break, imagining how good it will feel when deadlines stop and time finally opens up. But for many people, especially those with neurodivergent nervous systems, time off doesn't feel restful at all. It feels disorienting. If you've ever wondered why the holidays makes you feel more unsettled instead of restored, this episode is for you. Hi, I'm Dr. Theresa Haskins, and welcome to Think Differently, the podcast that challenges the status quo and explores the power of neurodiversity to create a more inclusive and accessible world. Together, we will talk about everything from the value of different perspectives to the limitless potential of human beings. We'll explore how embracing differences can lead to endless possibilities and how you can maximize strengths to make a positive impact on the world. So sit back, relax, and join me as we get ready to think differently. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here during the rush to the end of the year. For many families, it's a season of festivities and joy. For others, it's a time of year that can actually be quite complicated. Many people look forward to more downtime away from work. Yet today we're going to talk about why unstructured time can actually increase anxiety and low mood, and how the sudden loss of the routine affects the nervous system's regulation, and why this experience is not a personal failure, but it impacts neurodivergent people more, and it's an actual predictable psychological and neurological response to transition. So if the holidays leave you feeling a little off-balanced rather than refreshed, you're not imagining it, and you're not alone. We tend to look forward to time off, maybe especially those of us who are neurodivergent. So much of our daily life is regulated externally. Deadlines, schedules, expectations, transitions. Even when it feels like those systems are exhausting, they provide needed structure. And that structure does real, helpful psychological work. When school lets out, or work slows down, or the calendar suddenly clears, there's often an immediate sense of relief. We're excited to have the break and time to do what we want when we want to do it. We think, I don't have to perform. I don't have to keep pace with everyone else's expectations for a few weeks. At first, the unstructured time does feel like rest. But then for many people, something unexpected happens. A few days pass and time starts to feel slippery. Days blur together. You're active, but not grounded. Busy, but not oriented. You might find yourself starting things and finishing none of them, or doing very little at all and feeling strangely uneasy about it. For some people, that experience feels like freedom, but for others, it feels like drift. And that distinction matters. I've noticed this in my own life in very ordinary ways. A few days into break, I'll realize I've been busy all day, answering messages, tidying the house, reading, thinking, cooking, but I haven't actually finished anything. And instead of feeling rested, I start to feel unsettled, like the days are slipping past me without ever quite starting. And nothing's technically wrong, but it doesn't feel anchored either, and it starts to raise my anxiety. That's usually when people start looking around and wondering what's wrong with them, especially when it seems like everyone else is posting joy and gratitude and holiday cheer while they're starting to feel flat and low. This is the point where I want to be very clear. This reaction is not a personal failure, and it's not just anecdotal. It's a well-documented psychological pattern. Decades of research in behavioral psychology shows that the loss of routine is associated with increases in depressive symptoms, particularly during transition. And this isn't because people like being busy, but because routine provides what psychologists call behavioral activation, regular engagement, reinforcement, and temporal structures. When these things drop suddenly, mood often follows. In other words, when time loses shape, the nervous system doesn't automatically relax. It destabilizes. And while a week off doesn't feel like a transition in most people's mind, it absolutely is, because it represents a sudden change in pattern. And any change, even a temporary one, requires adjustment. Research on ADHD and executive function consistently shows that unstructured time increases cognitive load rather than reducing it. Surprising, right? When external cues disappear, the brain has to do more internal work. Now you have to decide what to do, when to do it, how long it will take, and whether it's even worth starting. That's not rest. That's actually effort. And I've seen this with my kids as well. When schedules disappear, people assume that means relief and relaxation. But what I often see instead is a quiet unraveling, starting lots of ideas, abandoning them quickly, staying up too late because there's no external signal to stop, then feeling worse the next day without quite knowing why. From the outside, unstructured time looks like freedom, but from the inside, it's disorienting. So when people say, I finally had time off and I didn't get out of it what I intended, they're often taught to interpret that as laziness or lack of motivation. But that narrative is both inaccurate and harmful. What's really happening is the loss of external scaffolding that had been quietly supporting the person's regulation. And when the holidays add another layer, that makes it even harder. Because it's not just that routine disappears, the environment itself is changing rapidly. Homes are rearranged, decorations go up, sensory input increases, more noise, more people, more lights, more unpredictability, social expectations rise, schedules become fuller with less predictable at the same time. And then, almost overnight, it all collapses. Guests leave, the stimulation stops, the calendar empties, the house becomes very quiet again. What we rarely acknowledge is how extreme that swing is. From a nervous system perspective, the holidays often involve rapid alternation between overstimulation and understimulation, sometimes within the same week or even the same day. Research on stress and predictability, particularly in autism and anxiety literature, shows that sudden changes in the environment and routine increase psychological stress responses, even when those changes are positive or anticipated. That's why it's not unusual for people to feel worse after the holidays than during them. Clinicians have observed this pattern for decades. Emergency psychiatric data, depression research, and seasonal mental health studies all point to the same thing. Symptoms often peak during periods of transition, not just during the period of stress. And there's also a cognitive layer to all of this that's easy to miss. When you spend most of the year running on someone else's schedule, it's natural to imagine that once you finally have time, you'll use it well. You'll catch up. You'll work on that project. You'll feel like yourself again. So when that time arrives and you don't use it the way you always expected to, the disappointment often turns inward. So now the issue isn't just unstructured time. It's the belief that you wasted something precious. Research on depression shows that self-criticism and withdrawal tend to reinforce one another, creating a feedback loop that's hard to interrupt. This is especially true for people who are used to being competent, productive, or high-achieving. When structure disappears, identity can wobble right along with their mood. Again, this is not a character flaw. It is a predictable interaction between nervous system regulation, executive functioning, and a sudden loss of temporal structure. So this matters because when people don't have the language for what's happening to them, they personalize it. They assume the problem is their motivation or lack of gratitude or resilience, instead of recognizing it's a structural and neurological mismatch. And once that story takes hold, people don't just feel anxious or low. They start judging themselves for it. That self-judgment often creates more distress than the original experience actually did. Understanding this doesn't magically fix the feeling, but it can stop the damage that comes from misinterpreting it. People talk a lot about burnout, but we talk much less about what happens when the grind stops abruptly and there's nothing in its place. For some people, rest does not come from the absence of structure. It comes from gentle restructuring, self-chosen rhythms, light anchors, a sense of beginning and ending without pressure to optimize. This doesn't mean turning rest into another task list, but it does mean recognizing that different nervous systems recover differently and that some of us need more structure to feel stable, not less. So if the holidays feel like a strange time for you, heavier, shapeless, harder to hold and get excited for, You're not imagining it, and you're not alone. There is language for this. There is research behind how you're feeling, and understanding that can change the story you tell yourself. Sometimes rest isn't about stopping. Sometimes it's about helping time find its shape again. Thank you for listening to this episode of Think Differently. I hope you found our discussion today insightful and thought-provoking. I want to thank Audio Work Studios for their exceptional production and recording support. Without their expertise and dedication, this podcast would not be possible. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to share it with others. Your support helps us to reach new audiences and promote neurodiversity in our world. Also, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite platform so that you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. We look forward to seeing you again soon on Think Differently.